Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grow IT podcast. And today I have Scott Braden, who is the Senior VP of Value Creation at NetNet. Probably one of my favorite uh, job titles that I've had the pleasure of reading. But I want to welcome Scott to the show. And if you are someone who views IT potentially as an expense or looking to reduce expenses, especially with a given economy, then you're going to want to listen to what Scott has to say. So, Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for being here. This would be it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I love
we're gonna have
talking
some.
about this stuff. So I'm happy to talk at length, as you know.
I love it. I like value forward. I mean, we talk about it so much in our firm, and I love value creation. I love anything revolving around value, and I love helping people increase their value proposition, which
Right.
sometimes can involve reducing their expenditures. But
Yep.
I'm not going to steal your thunder. I want you to kind of share with us some stuff. So maybe tell me about your background and tell us a little bit about NetNet.
Yeah, I mean that's really what value creation is, right? The math is simple. If you're a publicly traded or a private company, the value of the corporation is a function of your profits, right? There's a multiple involved. Some are 10x, some are 2x, but every dollar on the bottom line has a multiple to the value of the company. So we're in the business of bringing dollars to the bottom line and thereby creating value for the company. And that's ultimately why our clients hire us.
So, how does that go about taking place? Like, what are some of the challenges that I can imagine? Some of them, we even talked about, some
Yeah.
offline. But what are the challenges that are involved, and how do you go about, helping organizations tackle that?
Yeah. Our specialty is in technology, corporate technology. Our clients are large companies for the most part, large private companies, publicly traded, privately held. And I think a shorthand way to describe it is everything that would be in a CIO's budget is in scope for us, right? So technology in general, whether that's hardware, network infrastructure, that's software, whether that's cloud software or on-premise software, application software, infrastructure software, tools management, malware protection, you name it. If it's a line item on a CIO's budget, we're there to help them do it better, right? And that's an important distinction, I think, between doing it better and just doing it cheaper, right? Those are two different optimization paths. So somewhere in all of our blog posts on the site, there's a really cool chart illustrating the concept of you can have a local maximum here of optimization, and then there's a valley of despair, and then there's a local maximum here that's even higher of optimization. It looks like a mountain range almost, right? And there's different ways to optimize, or depending on what are you optimizing for is the question, right? So it's
You,
not
you,
just a case of cost cutting.
no, agree. And one of the questions I typically ask at the very beginning of these types of interviews is, obviously the people and the processes are two most important parts of any business, and I always ask folks is like, hey, how can your, product, service, or solution, help both of those? And it's a big one to tackle with what you're talking about because you can touch probably both, right? And
Yeah.
what's the most effective way of extracting the value and improving probably both the processes and the people.
Yeah. You know, people always ask, what's the magic? Where's the rabbit in the hat? And I
Right.
reply, there ain't no
There
magic.
is none.
It's, it's process, it's skill set, it's experience. There's a lot of, the old plumber joke about knowing where to hit the pipe in the right place. There's a fair amount of that. Okay. That's experience and expertise. But a lot of it is our mindset too. We just know from experience that in technology, there's so much hype and there's so much obfuscation, and there's so many cases where you've got the same functionality with a different name on it being sold at different price points. And we find again and again, anybody who's worked in large company IT will nod their head at this. There's so much shelfware. There's things that many of our clients are openly. We have two solutions for this problem and three solutions for that problem, and we don't really want to get rid of any of them, even though they're absolute duplicates. And just there's always fertile ground for us to look at any large corporation. That's just as we were talking before we came on. Large companies have large company problems, and this is one of them. And we just help them define and go poke at the right problems.
So how do you go about doing that? And again, I think one of the things that people love to hear about is kind of, I call them success stories.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Maybe if you can kind of tie that in, right? Because,
Yeah.
people love hearing success stories because then they know that they can probably apply that to their own organization, and every organization is unique and different.
Yeah.
But
For
maybe if you
sure.
can kind of give me a couple of examples.
Yeah, I like to keep track of those. That's one of my favorite things to track
Great.
because the big numbers are fun. There's one I'm working right now. We haven't even closed it out, and it's a Microsoft deal. It's actually a combination of several things. There's their EA for their software for their internal use. I'm using a technology term, right?
Okay.
And I'm not sure who your audience is if I need to explain what an EA is, but if you're a
I
big company,
always, here's what I would say: always
yeah,
dumb it down for the host, and
yeah,
I'll need you to dumb that down for me. So, what does EA
good.
stand for?
Enterprise agreement,
Okay.
and it's Microsoft's volume contract for large companies. Nobody's going to pay the $20 web retail price for whatever,
Right.
right? They're paying the volume discount price.
Right.
That's a special contract that Microsoft offers for large companies. It's a little bit different than the usual stuff. And it's a negotiated contract for the most part. I mean, there are list prices to it, but big companies don't pay list prices, right? Um, so their renewal spend rate, they're coming up on a renewal January 1st. The quote in hand for that renewal is a little under $6 million a year for their Microsoft stuff. In addition to that, there's some Azure spend for their cloud use that they're spending about $5 million a year on that.
Wow.
And this is one of my colleagues working this side of the project. They've got an Amazon AWS account that's even larger still, and I won't give the specifics on that, but it's far larger than either of those Microsoft topics. That's a pretty typical scenario. We see a lot of that kind of stuff these days. Okay, so I think it was 5.6 million was the actual renewal number we started from. And they're a pretty typical large corporation. They've got Office, they've got the 365 services on the back end, they've got some of this, they've got some servers left on premise. Pretty typical setup these days. And we applied our process to it. We went in and did an assessment. There's a structured methodology we followed for assessment. We ask them a lot of questions. And I tell CIOs this and CFOs this in the pre-sales phase. You have sharp people. They've probably already looked at these questions. There's nothing secret about what I'm going to tell you to look at. You've probably read it in a blog post before. We're going to ask the question again, and we're not going to be satisfied with the first round of answers. We're going to do some due diligence and checking. And that's what we do. And having completed that process a couple of weeks ago, we've already taken almost $2 million a year out of that 5.6 target.
Wow.
Just from, hey, you don't need to buy this. There's a better way to buy that. Don't buy this, buy that instead, et cetera, et cetera. And some of that, like I said, is knowing where to look. Some of that is understanding Microsoft in particular has a complex pricing system, what you can do with that. And then a lot of it is just the due diligence of knowing what questions to ask, how IT runs, and what the alternatives in the marketplace are.
Wow. Obviously you have an extensive background in it. You'd have to be able to, it's kind of like, with our firm and the sales and marketing stuff, we know the right questions to ask and how to ask them in a number of different ways to go deep to make sure that we're applying the correct solution.
Yeah.
How do you amass that kind of experience and that ability to ask the right questions, right? Because that's so important.
Yeah. It's something the high school guidance counselor would never say, hey, here's a career track for you. Be a deep knowledge expert on this obscure topic. I've been in tech my whole career pretty much. I started working for a company called CompuCom in Dallas. CompuCom in the 90s was one of the major PC resellers to big companies. This is just before Dell came along and just upended the entire desktop PC corporate market. But from that, being a salesperson there, I learned about the technology business. Right, my customers were big companies, and that's how I stayed into it. And from there, I moved into almost accidentally just one of these career track things. That it's a funny story actually. My main customer was an insurance company in Boston. Boston has lots of insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
One day, the interoffice mail shows up. You remember the manila envelopes with the
string? With the string on it to keep it together.
It's on my desk, and what's this? And goes, well, your client just signed his contract with Microsoft, back in those days, you'd buy a PC and you'd also buy the software with it, right?
Right.
In
Right.
boxes. It came
Right.
in boxes
Right.
with paper
With all the
manuals
discs that you had to
and
load up on
discs.
them. I remember.
As a distributor, that's a pain in the ass. That's a lot of inventory that's not adding any value. So Microsoft picked up on that and went with just license only. You don't need the code.
Mm-hmm.
CompuCom is here to load the software. They're an authorized reseller. We trust them to not, pirate the software. We load it for them. It's all one configured. And just as it's a typical modern situation today, the PC shows up at the end user ready to go. Okay. It was revolutionary then, but so I got to manage that contract and learn. And so just by default of that, I became the go-to Microsoft guy in the office. And we eventually built a $200 million a year business just on
Wow.
software from that because management realized quickly there's no inventory cost on this. There's no warehousing. Let's do more of that.
Right.
Let's
Right.
have some more of
Right.
that.
I like that. No CapEx. I like that. Scale that part up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then a few years later, I was doing IT asset management, which is a variation of this. I got into, generally speaking, the management of IT. There's several frameworks out there. There's one called ITIL, ITIL. There's an ISO, International Standards Organization framework. It's basically just what are the best practices for managing an IT shop.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle a help desk ticket? What's the correct way to do a change so that it doesn't blow things up? And these days, these practices are built into the software. They're ingrained into IT. In those days, they were all manual, so you had to go teach people. So I spent a lot of time doing consulting, teaching people about those, putting them in place, and just fixing all the gaps because IT had been the cowboy west for a long time. The guru in the back shack who knew everything and don't piss him off, right? And it had to make that transition to a professional, way of life. And during that phase, I kept noticing that my clients were having problems with expenses of all this software. And for the same root cause we just talked about, it's complicated. There's a lot of gobbledygook. There's a lot of intentional confusion that the vendors put into it. And I just happened to have the ability and background to cut through it. And so I just started doing it as favors for clients. I was actually on a project for something else. Hey, let me help you with this real quick. No charge, just because it bugs me that you're getting screwed.
Mm-hmm.
And that became a small consulting side gig for me. And then NetNet found me, and I joined NetNet. And gosh, it's been 17 years now. So
wow.
That's I'm not going to do the math on that.
I'm not either.
Before my beard was gray.
That makes two of us. That's why I won't grow mine out anymore.
I've got the Santa Claus look going. And 17 years later, here we are. It's been a crazy ride. It's an amazing, satisfying ride. You can look at the website. We've got some marquee names for clients.
Yeah.
And some just amazing deals that I've been privy to, none of which I can really talk about the details of, but generally. So that's how I got here.
What are some of the challenges that you see that these larger organizations, because that's primarily who you're working with, right? Because obviously, if you're going in with multiple budgets of 5, 6 million, 2 million for different aspects of their IT, those are pretty large organizations. What are the challenges that you see that they are facing? And again, I can imagine how you're helping them overcome, but again, talk more through that.
Yeah, part of that is me down in the weeds of my little world doing software deals, but that's all driven by the bigger scope of what's going on in the broader financial marketplace. So many of the clients we're dealing with, if not most these days, are being bought and sold. Private equities,
M&A,
usually buying, right? In some cases, carving out, but mostly buying and rolling up, right? So from a technology perspective, that gets complicated because the companies you're buying already have a tech stack.
Right.
But the buying company has a preferred tech stack. You got to integrate all that. It's a technology problem. It's also a contracting problem, contracting and vendor relationship problem. There's just many, many moving pieces of it. It's really an information challenge is the way I think about it. And given that, okay, let's pretend you're the IT director of a company. Tap on the shoulder one morning. Hey, we've been bought by private equity, and the new boss is coming in this morning to tell you what your new marching orders. Can you imagine the stress level for something like that?
No, because and I would imagine that again, like you point out, and I've heard this actually talking to other IT consulting firms from a different respect, but
Yeah.
you know, the fact that the M&A involvement and them coming in and then trying to figure out what parts to unify, what people to unify, or,
Yeah. Right.
maybe eliminate. Right. And so again, that's why I bring up, even in the beginning, the people and processes. It touches, all of our decision making in business, kind of touches all of it. But tell
Mhm.
me, again, I want you to
So
share some
yeah,
of
so
those
that
stories.
happens, and then private equity calls us in. The owners call us in to say, look at it, clean it up, fix it. Do what needs to be done. You're our advisors here, and so I'm constantly aware that of the context of why I'm showing up and looking over this person's shoulder, who's a smart, talented professional, knows his stuff. May not be expert in the deep details of Microsoft contracts, but that's one little area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then looking over the shoulder, second guessing him. But I try to be helpful. I just give them the advice that I can give them to help them get a better deal, to help them make the right choices, and to let them. The number one thing I think that I want to give them is certainty, because that's so rare in today's world, right? I like to tell my clients, look, by the time this is done, I'm not just going to tell you what to do and just force you to do it because I've got your boss behind me. That doesn't work. I need you to understand it. I need you to vet it. I'm going to give the other guys a chance to talk, and I want you to be 100% confident that you're doing the right thing for the right reasons when we leave. And so that's really what I think I'm ultimately selling is certainty for the rank and file people, and also for the owners, that they know it's done right and it's got backing, it's done professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, and certainty in our world seems more uncertain a lot
So
of
rare.
times than
Yeah.
anything, right?
So
And
rare.
again, I think that it's a testament to your value first tribe, right? I mean, your
Yeah.
value creation, value first. It's if you're driving
That's what
value,
it's all about. Yeah.
yeah,
I like being right there where the numbers are. I can measure my results. It's no argument about it for the most part. And occasionally we get into hypotheticals, but we work around it. That shouldn't be the problem.
What are some of the things that you see, coming down the pike, right? What are some of the trends that you see? Obviously, AI is a big one, right? And that's kind of the first, go to. But
Yeah.
but tell me
Yeah.
about some of the other, even if that's part of it. But tell me about some of the other trends that you're seeing that businesses need to be aware of with respect to IT.
Right now, I think we're in a phase of continuation of what's been going on for a few years now. That is the cloud and everything as a service. Those two, you know, they're side by side. Those two trends are intertwined, right? The cloud meaning, and I think it's the right thing to do. I mean, very few businesses really should be in the business of fitting out a data center and running servers and dealing with network gear. That's not your business
And that's
anymore.
really what the cloud is, right? I mean,
Yeah,
essentially,
exactly.
from a simplified standpoint, it's just basically someone else's servers and someone else's hardware that they're maintaining
Yeah.
that you're borrowing or utilizing.
Yeah, it's the difference. So, what business would have their own electricity generator on site, right?
Good
Okay,
analogy.
it's got to be a pretty special use case for that. There's cases for it, but not all of them. And that's the same with IT background functioning. Just lease it, pay by the drink from whoever. Put a meter on the back of your house and pay for electricity that way
Mm-hmm.
instead of having your own generator. So that's cool. I like that. But what that does, that's obviously, economically speaking, that's consolidation. That's going to be one or two or three players ultimately, and it already is. There's Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, plus a long list of whoever else, right? And that's just the nature of the economics of it. And this is true of software in general and technology in general. So the same thing is happening and being accelerated in parallel with software as a service, cloud as a service. So instead of buying an asset that's a hardware computer and sending it in your office, and that's an asset no different than a machine would be in a factory. Instead, you're just renting it by the drink, right? That does some interesting things to the software model. If you look at Microsoft, for example, which I know best, I've tracked their earnings statements for 20 years now, and back in the day when they were shipping boxes with floppies in it, their gross margins were about 85%, 87%, give or take, which is amazing. You know,
Yes.
and now, for a long time, that actually went up a little bit because they weren't shipping very many boxes. They were just doing downloads, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now they're delivering it as well. They're delivering it via the cloud. Anytime you use email, anytime you use Office, there's servers that are Microsoft factory serving that to you somewhere from a SaaS. That's a cost. They're taking over the cost of what used to be a corporate data center. That's now Microsoft's data center.
Mm-hmm.
So their margins have actually gone down, if you can believe it. Their gross margins have gone down since they've gone to the cloud because they're operating those data centers. That's a big cost. But their overall profits have continued to grow because they're consolidating, because they're getting more share of wallet, which is the Microsoft term that they use, because they just keep continue. There's a natural monopolistic effect of that, the network effect, right? It's just easier.
Do you think there will that trend will continue in terms of the consolidation under, let's call it probably the three big players, which are Microsoft, AWS, and Google?
Yeah, that's the mega trend. And as far as disruptors for big corporate IT, so let's take a step back and think of it from the Wall Street point of view. I'm thinking about it from my technician point of view. From the owner's point of view, you look at a given company, you look at a given business model. Does technology make or break this business, or is it just an enabler? Okay. What business are you in, right? So we can think about a company like Netflix. Netflix is a technology company. You and I think of them as a content company, but they're a tech company. Right? They run on technology. They wouldn't exist without technology. Mm-hmm. And technology is their competitive advantage. You take a company like W.W. Grainger Industrial Supplies. That's not a tech company. That's a distribution company. Tech's important to them, right? But if the computers disappeared tomorrow, they'd still be in the business of shipping nuts and bolts around. You see the difference?
Yeah.
And there's a range of possibilities in between. So as an owner, you got to say, all right, well, what really is my business in, and what really is Microsoft or Oracle or Salesforce? What are they really going to do for me to enable that? And I think that's the flip side of this monopoly I was talking about. It's all going to go to commodity. Pretty soon. That's the trend, because if you're not creating business value because of your software, then margins are only going one way. You see what I'm saying?
I do. Do you see it then as, so if I'm Microsoft or AWS or Google, right, and that part of the business is going to be commoditized, but they can also look at it and say, hey, we're going to have this opportunity to sell other products and services via Riot, right? Because if we become the go-to, cloud provider for businesses, then we will be able to roll out other types of product services. I know I've talked to a couple of folks. I actually talked with someone this morning that I had on a podcast who is in, telecom part of the business, right? So they help, businesses who have on-premise hardware and moving them to the cloud specifically for communication, both with, they're mainly largely call centers, but at the same time, it's communications throughout the organization as well. But I guess I'm using that as an example to say they're helping move folks to one of those big three, right? Who then are trying to sell more products via, telecom or whatever. Do you see that to be the trend then?
Microsoft, especially of the big three, it's interesting. The big three have three different strategies with what they're doing with the cloud. And Microsoft is closest to what you're thinking about, which is they want.
It was, by the way, they are consulting for doing Microsoft, but I'm curious I'm curious to hear this.
Yeah, that's the Microsoft strategy is growth by accretion, add more products, add more services. Because think about it, they started with Windows, or not Windows, DOS, really back in the day, right? And they've got this history of they'll buy a product. Sometimes they release their own, but lately they mostly just buy a product. And
just roll it into their own offering.
Roll it in, and it's bundling, right? They roll it in the bundle. There's a product that used to be called SMS, now called System Center, that's for managing large quantities of PCs. It's a remote management tool for managing desktops, managing servers, and whatnot. Originally, they bought it as a utility from somebody. It's been bundled in for years and years. I don't think I've ever had a client who bought it as a separate standalone product, but it's free, so why not use it, right? And then eventually they'll carve it out, and they've done that with this product, and now it's sold separately and charges extra. That's the strategy, and it works great for them. So they're constantly increasing their market share and adding new value, things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, it was. And I know that AWS seems to be going into that market in terms of telecom and going that route as well. I guess maybe, maybe you can tell me what your viewpoint is. Granted, you know a lot about and have a lot of exposure to Microsoft,
Sure.
how, if you're to take those big three, Microsoft, AWS, and Google,
Yeah.
how would you just kind of mentioned, Microsoft, but how would you view how AWS is going to market as well as Google compared to Microsoft?
Yeah. I mean, to a limited extent, they're kind of looking for different ideal customers, although there's a lot of overlap between them. And you can make some broad generalizations, but there's a lot of overlap between what they're doing. I'll start with Google first because that's the easiest one to just knock on and dismiss. Google's not in the cloud business. Google's in the advertising business, and they're not. Google, their documents and their suite that they have, that's not a legitimate enterprise product. They'll say it is, but it's not. They don't care about that business. They're there just to nag on Microsoft, just be a distraction because they're really in the advertising business,
Yeah.
but they really want us to keep that mind share.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Amazon, are they really in the cloud business, or are they in the product? Are they in the catalog business? Right, they're in the shopping business. Which one is it? Because their cloud business originally grew because they needed cheaper processing, so they built their own data centers, and then they realized, hey, we're doing this cheaper than anybody else is. We can sell that.
Right.
That's a good thing to sell.
Right.
They're the juggernaut. They're the leader in that space. They're definitely the best. Every time we do a head-to-head, they win on almost every category.
Wow.
And they're just easier to deal with than Microsoft is. Now, I'm speaking in the limited context of large companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
All companies are a different market. Individuals are a different market. Microsoft has a gaming division. I don't ever mess with that, you know. But I'm not real sure what Amazon's really doing long term with their cloud thing. There's probably better analysts out there than me who can tell you. I know exactly what they're up to, right? I just know in the limited little world that I see of the big business world, they're winning because they're easier to deal with and the pricing's better and the functionality is equal or better in every case.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. It will be interesting to see what they do, right? Because as they accumulate more of, probably they're probably taking some market share away from Microsoft in some cases, and then
Yeah, they definitely are.
and
And
once
you
you
can
have,
see it,
go ahead.
in my view, I can see how they're competing. Not very many clients are even doing a head to head, a true head to head of Azure versus Microsoft. Most of the time, they've already picked one or the other. Normally, they've already picked Amazon first anyway. And then here's Microsoft fighting a defensive action, so to speak. Hey, we've got some of that stuff too. We can sell you that too. And what they're doing is, in my opinion, borderline monopolistically illegal, if not all the way over the line. If you buy this Azure stuff from us, we'll cut you a deal on this other thing here, right? And they're literally using their monopoly power to get business.
Are they taking a page out of the old Microsoft book from
Oh yeah.
the 80s?
Hey, Bill Gates grew up in the IBM world. He knows how to play the monopoly game. Yeah, or
I
not there anymore, but his
Right.
brother's days. Yeah,
Right. I remember it well. That's why I'm laughing as you talk about, it's kind of
yeah,
like the old pot calling the kettle black, theory.
exactly.
But
Yeah,
what do you see? And I know this is we've touched on a lot of this. This question I asked everybody: what is the most significant value that your firm can bring to businesses, and how do you communicate that value? And this should be an easy one for you, just because you're so value focused and value driven.
yeah.
But how do you
It should be a no
communicate?
brainer.
Well, yeah, it should
I
be.
always say the hardest part of our sales approach is getting the right person to listen for 30 seconds and say, what, you can do that? Yeah, we do that day in and day out. And it's simple. It's cost savings without giving up the functionality that you actually need to run the business. And from an owner's perspective, from a C-level perspective, it's certainty. There's an information problem in big companies. You can't get a straight answer from the people sometimes. Everyone has their own agenda. A person who grew up in a Microsoft world is never, ever, ever going to recommend a competing solution. And like I said, it's an information problem. These folks, they're working 60-hour weeks already. Their heads down. They're running from one emergency to the next. They don't have time to go out and do market research and do a competitive analysis and whatnot. That's what we're here for. We're specialists for that.
Yeah.
Bring in a specialist.
What's the old what was the old saying when we came into business world and you mentioned IBM, right? Never got fired for bringing on IBM, right?
Yeah, and it's Microsoft now. That's the answer.
Yeah.
And we've had clients just honestly straight out say to us, Microsoft is the answer. What's the question? and now go save us money, right?
Right. 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 No.
Okay, that's what I do.
Yeah. Can you walk us through the path of what a new client, right, or how that looks like in terms of their process of bringing you on board and bringing you involving in their organization to let's call it I love reducing expenses, but I prefer the term unlocking value because it's more meaningful and has a
Yeah,
greater impact to business. I don't know how you feel
yeah.
about it, but that
That's that's
let's
that's because you're a sales professional and I'm not.
maybe, but we're
Yeah,
both saying the same thing. I think it's
yeah.
just the matter of the semantics of
The
how we're
messaging is
describing it.
important,
Yes,
and depending on who
exactly.
you're talking to,
Yeah.
who's thinking about it that
And
way.
as a marketing guy, right, the messaging is important. But can you kind
Yeah,
of walk us through that path of what it typically looks like? And again, I know typical is typically atypical, but what does
yeah,
it
and
involve? What does it look like?
one of the great lessons of sales and marketing is that not every customer is ready to buy it at any given point, right? And
100%.
there's trigger points, there's reasons, there's stages, right? And so most of the time, it's going to be a few driving factors that bring them to the table. And let's just say up front, everybody working for every corporation, if you say to them, "Hey, do you want to save money without reducing functionality?" Of course I do. I also love my mom and apple pie, right? The question is, of the 800 other things on your to-do list, where does this rank, right? And sometimes it ranks higher than others. So that's the first thing is there has to be a driving cause. Normally, that's going to be one of two things. It'll be a roll up, like we were talking about before. A new owner's in town, and they're going to look at everything, right? And a lot of times, if private equity is buying it, they have a thesis already. I say a lot of times, every time they have a thesis already, and it's focused on certain targets being hit in terms of numbers and savings and whatnot. Um, Sometimes we're involved in that estimating process, usually not, right? And just like with the target buyee company, they're not involved in what their new metrics are going to be. They're just told what they're going to be. Go get them, right? So that creates the urgency. Okay, I'm the new boss. I've been hired to take this number from 5 million to 3.2 million. How am I going to do that, right? Here we are. We've got ways to do that. Now, as far as the engagements, that's really how I like to frame it with our clients. Really, is how much money do you need to save, right? If you've got a $10 million a year IT spend run rate, how much do you want to take out of it? You want to take $1 million out of it? You want to take 2 million out of it? Give us a target. Like I said earlier, you optimize for the target that the client wants, and we'll go do that, right? And we're confident we can do it. We don't sign up for things we don't think we can do. If somebody says, "I want to take that to 5 million from 10," you're going to have to make some painful cuts. If you want to do that, we'll optimize it for you, right? And if you want to take 1 million out of it, you can probably just do that without hurting anything. No bone at all cut on that one.
Are
So
there
that's
are there level like you just brought up a good point, right? Right, which is someone who's trying to cut their IT budget in half. That's pretty significant. And there's going to be
yeah,
more than just bumps and bruises, right? There's probably going to
right,
be some flesh wounds in that.
yeah,
Is there kind of a rule of thumb where you kind of say, "Hey, look, we can probably get you 10 to 20%, savings from here, but if you start going beyond a certain level, then we need to prepare you for what that could look like too."
yeah. We do. We track the averages. We track the actuals. Um, it's it's really difficult to say in advance sometimes, just with not having gotten the weeds.
Mm-hmm.
But we can say here the average is 25% in this category, 30% in that category. It's made up primarily of these factors, that fall into it. We're able to say that just on just verbal information of what the situation is with the client a lot of times. But you're right. There's if it gets much beyond 30, 35%, unless there's something really unique about the situation, it's going to be tricky to do it.
Yeah.
The one I was telling you earlier that went from 5.6 to it's almost 2 million a year we're taking out of it right now, so it's 4 point something now. Um, that one had a little bit of a unique situation that not every client has, right? So it looks great on the wall. Hey, I got $2 million off a $5 million deal. That looks fantastic. There's always, there's a reason. It's not because the people were incompetent. They're not, right? It's just that there's a unique situation that we're exploiting here. Um, some situations are better than others. And a lot of it depends on the particular supplier you're dealing with too. Microsoft has one way of dealing with price. Oracle has a different way of dealing with price, and everyone's a little bit different. So there's knowledge and wiggle room in there as well.
What's your favorite thing about what you do? What's your favorite thing that you enjoy the most?
I've thought about that a lot. It really is. Two things about that. One, I like helping people. I like being able to take someone who's, like I said, it's just in a terribly stressful and frustrating situation, and just give them some plain old help. Here, you feel better. You can make your budget. It's going to work now. You're not getting fired, and you know that you did the right thing. Right? That's so rare, especially in corporate jobs. So that's big. The other thing I like for my own selfish purposes is I like learning about all these different companies because okay, I'm not doing a full audit here, but I'm deep diving on their business, and I'm learning a lot about what makes them tick, because we have to ask those questions, right? What really makes this company make money, so we know not to touch that, right?
Yeah.
Don't break that,
Yeah.
right? And because well, I'll start cutting things if there's no justification for it. I'll say, "Why are you doing this?" I do this all the time. I had that conversation just last week. They wanted to keep like 200 extra users on the payment plan just in case we need them. Like, you can order them at any time, right? There's no delay on it. You don't need you don't need a
Right.
storehouse.
Right. You don't need to store 200 licenses.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
may have to give them the conversation of the cloud and readily available and ready to deploy.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why it's like why it's there's no shipping time on cloud licenses. You
Yeah.
just click the button and you're good.
I would
We'll just
imagine that would probably be my favorite thing as well, right? Like I love having these conversations with different executives and business owners. Granted, they're all in the IT consulting world of things, but it's just
yeah.
fascinating. And I'd have to imagine when you get involved in the large organizations, and you lift up the hood to get to see not only what's under it, but how the mechanisms are actually working inside of it. What is the true economic engine, right? And seeing all that work together, I'd imagine sometimes you're probably shaking your head like wondering how it even can function on a daily,
More
weekly, or
than
even
once, I've
quarterly
questioned
basis.
how does this company stay in business, right? But and it's been gratifying to me because now I've gotten a secondhand education in private equity, right? I've gotten the Wall Street biggies have taught us how they do things. Not all their secrets, obviously, of course, but we get a view on how they look at the world. It's been enlightening to me as well as a business person.
Yeah, and like them or not, it does somewhat remind me of like in the 80s and 90s where we had the kind of the savings and loan crisis, but it was really from a consolidation and rating mergers, acquisitions, right? It was under different type of conditions. Now it seems
Yeah,
like more and more, we have the private equity firms, family offices that are coming in, buying multiple businesses and rolling them up and consolidating. This is a recurring thing. I've probably had this conversation over 30 to 40% of the time that I
yeah,
speak with
that's
execs and
right. That's what I was
founders.
getting at earlier with the cloud and softwareization of everything. It just it incents that behavior. It makes it the most efficient way, right? There's no need for a dry cleaner here and a dry cleaner there to independently create their own operating systems. It's a dry cleaner, right? There only needs to be one set of software to run that,
Yeah.
and it's just more efficient that way.
All right. I have to bring in the AI. Since we're talking about, efficiencies
Yeah,
and things of that nature, we're again, we've been around for a long time in the business world, and you especially in, and specifically in IT, where do you think that we will be? Again, you can pull out a crystal ball and guesstimate,
oh
right?
sure,
Because none
yeah,
of us really know at this point. It just seems like it's become mainstream over the last, year, probably because of ChatGPT, but
yeah,
machine learning and things of that nature have been around for a long time. But so, from someone who's been involved in these organizations, what do you think of it? Where do you think it's going to go? Where do you think it will be? How do you think it will be helpful?
the Chat GPTs, the large language models, the LLMs. I'm not so impressed with. They're cool, they're neat, they're good for putting out written material and verbal content and things like that. It's not that great though. If you ever really look, I'm a history buff, right? So I've got into long, deep dives with the GPTs, and there's several of them out there on history topics that I'm familiar with, and they kind of make stuff up, and they kind of just fudge it a bit. It's like you're dealing with a freshman in college writing. I got to get this essay to 2,000 words, right? So that's disconcerting. That you don't want to
Yeah.
run a business that way,
Yeah.
right? I'll tell you what's most interesting to me these days is the big data. That's getting less hype these days, but that's interesting because if everything's got software, everything's metric, um, and I mean, if you work in the sales space, you know what's going on with all the tools in the internet tracking space. There's so much data out there about everybody and everything and every transaction. The people that are getting that and taking insights from that are miles ahead from the rest of us just poking around in the dark, right? It's a blind man and the elephant problem, and big data is a friggin' spotlight from a helicopter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what is the LLM going to do with that? What's Chat GTP? Is there going to be a friendly conversational interface to the database of all things, right? The database of all information. I don't think that's quite there yet. I know people are working on that, and I think that's where Microsoft wants to go with their Copilot
Copilot.
stuff. Yeah, because I'm sure you saw this when the ChatGPT first came out. There was people at Samsung that were using it, right, and they inadvertently disclosed confidential data to
Oh no.
ChatGPT.
Oh
Yeah,
no, I
that was a
didn't.
problem. And so you want to do that, right? And so the next thing now is there's already consulting services all over the place. I'll set up your own GPT on your data, right?
Right.
Which isn't as easy as you would make it. It's not just loading some software and letting it run. There's a lot of human labor involved in that. Um, but I think that's where the big companies are going to go. So they're going to be competing now, not just on the products and services they sell, but who's better at running their LLMs.
Hmm.
Microsoft, of course, is going to be the best at it because they've got the biggest database. And especially if they've got everybody else's data as part of their database, right? So you start thinking about what did I just sign when I clicked through that click through agreement? Are they taking all my data? Oh, it's anonymous.
Sure it is.
What does that even mean in today's
Right.
world? Is anything anonymous in the world anymore?
No. Yeah,
But
I do think it's fast, and a lot of I speak with a lot of consulting firms that are specifically working with big data, and that is one of the interesting aspects of it. And I've asked a few of them. I remember back when I came into the business world, and I was probably 5 years in when the internet, right, was coming about, and
right,
businesses knew they had to they knew how to address it and harness some of the efficiencies in it, but they were very concerned, right, about letting the outside world in. And that's where a lot of the intranet, I believe, started to develop. And then as they got more comfortable with using an intranet within their own organization, right, and kind
right.
of built that, got over their concerns, I guess, let's say.
That's one thing I think Microsoft did with their Copilot announcement. Now, it's early days yet. It's a Microsoft 1.0 product, so you know it's going to be flaky. But get past that. They were really careful to architect this. They've already got this infrastructure in their system that basically lets you get really granular with data labeling. Not many people are using it and are using it effectively yet, but it's going to be needed. And that is, okay, every piece of data in your enterprise, is it sensitive or not? Can it be disclosed or not? Right? It's going to have to be tagged one way or the other. I think an AI could do that for humans with a reasonable degree of accuracy. Not 100%, but pretty
but
good.
and you know what? And I think that in itself is what AI, at least I want to be careful I say that because I say it too generic, right? But let's just liken it back to ChatGPT because I have a freshman that's gone away that's in college, and I've said to him, "Hey, don't be afraid to leverage ChatGPT. Just use it; it'll get you 80% of the way there. You don't have to no
Right.
longer start from scratch. It can kind of
Yeah.
help you along the way, but it's just going to get you 80% of the way there." And I think that may be the same way that it can be, harnessed within, organizations and to kind of tackle the big data issue as well. It's
Yeah.
like, hey,
It's
we're
good
not
at
going to,
matching and comparing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's say a business owner or an executive is watching this today and is fully enthralled with your value proposition, which I am. I love it. And they're wondering if you can help them with their business. what would you tell them? And what's a good next step?
Just hit us up. I'm not a very good salesperson.
You don't have to. That's the whole point, right? If you're delivering value, you don't have to sell anything. But
yeah, netweb.com. Go there and hit the thing. We have a real low key sales process. Just talk, find out what your situation is. Number one, we're both qualifying each other, right? You got to have enough spend to make it worthwhile, and that's really the number one qualifying question I ask prospects is, look, how important is this to you? If it's number 30 on your list, let's not waste our time, right? But I always ask them, where's Microsoft in your IT spend? And it's always top 10. Usually it's 1, 2, or 3. And I say, okay, if I take 30% out of that, how important would that be to you? And that's really, it's got to be important to the client or we're not going to do it, right? So that's the biggest thing. And then, of course, I focus on Microsoft and the related ecosystem, which is probably, if you count PCs and hardware, that's a huge number in most corporations. Think how much a laptop's at least $1,000 to $2,000, depending on what you're shipping. Not even counting support costs and all the other soft costs, TCO. That's a big number, and that's a CapEx number. That's not an OpEx number like Microsoft is. So we love to affect those numbers. Those are big. And just like with Microsoft, there's simple things you can do that there's nothing novel or groundbreaking about them. It's just that people haven't done it yet because they didn't have the analytical certainty required to be able to go to the board and say, we're making a major change in how we do things, and we've got every T crossed and every I dotted. We know this is the right thing to do. That's hard to do, and that takes a certain amount of skill set. That's what we're here for.
So you bring, if a prospect brings certainty and a need for and a high priority, you're a good next step. Then I would say.
Yeah, you need, and if they're just desperate to cut costs, we'll take that too.
That works too. Yeah, and I hate to say it, but I mean, obviously in the current economy, and whether it gets bad or better, there's probably going to be opportunity for that.
Yeah, and if the economy's up, we're helping them buy better. If the economy's down, we're helping them cut. So it's a good business to be in.
It's a great business. Well, I love it, and like I said, the value proposition and the value forward. I could talk about it for days. I just love value propositions. I think that truly that exemplifies what a true win-win is in terms from a vendor, supplier, and customer.
I'm not happy unless I can show direct, indisputable dollar value. That's what makes me happy.
Yeah, that makes two of us. Well, great. Well, listen, Scott, I really appreciate it. I love this conversation. I would love to circle back on this in, let's say, 6 to 12 months, because we'll be able to see where we are in terms of the economy, some more success stories from, I'm going to call it value creation, value unlocking, rather than expense reduction. But
value creation's great.
So we'll look forward to having you on next time.
All right. Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Terrence, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Scott.
All right.
Hang on.